Could you connect it to, I think that one over there? Yeah. There we go. So one more time. So welcome to Connect and Create. I'm Karina Sephora, and we have the wonderful Katherine Mitchell with us today. And we are on part 2 of her presentation. Katherine, anything you'd like to say before we get into the rest of the introductions?
Well, first of all, I thank you, Karina, for inviting me to do this talk, and then being so patient and kind and helpful and generous with me last week and giving me the second shot at this time with images. So
Yeah.
I truly am appreciative, and also to all of you guys who've shown up more than once and are back for more, and I really appreciate it very much. So.
Wonderful. Well, let's see. Katherine has some fabulous, so I'll share with you, and welcome again, Katherine. Welcome everyone who's here in the audience. We'll have some time towards the end for question and answer. But as we get started, I'd just like to share with you a little about how Connect and Create began. As I mentioned, I'm Karina Sephora. I'm an artist, and I live here in Atlanta, Georgia. Although last week I was in Hawaii, Maui, Hawaii, and I'm here with my down jacket now. And I began Connect and Create as the pandemic set in. And I was so used to, one of the things that I love about being an artist is going and being a part of art events and getting a chance to have conversations. And Katherine Mitchell is one of the people who I always seek out at art events to have a wonderful, brief conversation with. And I noticed that was missing in my life. That part of my social life was missing, being able to be out and about and share information and see other people's work. And so I thought I'd create an online presentation, online platform that people could share their work and a little story about who they are. And so Katherine is our guest number 39 and 40. So that's pretty exciting. And this year I also received or I'm in the process of receiving, I should say, just to be totally truthful, a grant from the Fulton County Council for the Arts for innovative thinking and creating something to bring the community together. So I'm honored to be a recipient of that. Katherine Mitchell is, I'm going to share a little bit about her bio, and she has some fabulous accolades. So Katherine Mitchell has exhibited widely, including the National Museum for Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., the American Academy of Arts and Letters in New York, the High Museum in Atlanta, and the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Georgia, the Arkansas Art Center in Little Rock, and the factory of the Kunsthalle Krems in Austria, and more. She was a master series artist in 2007 at Atlanta City Gallery East, which is now Pont City Market, right? And the building is, at least. And she had a working artist project grant from MoCA GA in 2010, 2011. And in 1995, she began work on 15,000 square foot of ceramic tile murals for the N10 MARTA station in Sandy Springs, which was completed in 2000. Mitchell has a BFA from the Atlanta College of Art and did postgraduate work at Tyler School of Art in Rome, Italy, and completed her MFA at Georgia State University. She taught drawing and painting at Emory University for 29 years before retiring, and she was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1944. So let's give a warm welcome. This is how we clap on Zoom. I don't know if you have experienced that, but we'll give a warm welcome for Katherine. And Katherine, anything you'd like to share before we get into your presentation?
I think I'm going to limit it to the presentation, but again, I'm so honored to be here, and I'm honored by the presence of all of you attendees. It means a lot to me.
Wonderful. I'm just pulling that presentation up right now, and I will share. And Katherine, just say next when you'd like me to move to the next image.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. The exhibition title is Hearing the Trees, and I think of that not so much in hearing as some scientists and others can do apparently, is hear the difference between wind and pines and wind and oak trees. I can't do that. I'm not that sensitive that way. But this was more in the sense of I understand their problems. I hear you. I'm going to try and work with you, see what we can do. So that was the sense of hearing the trees in the title. And then the next, this funny place for me to start about my own work, but this is an 1878 engraving by J.W. Lauterbach, and none of this exists anymore. These are chestnut trees that had been there since before the founding of our country, the US, and they are chestnuts. So they're all, that type of chestnut tree is extinct in this country. There are efforts to revive it, but they have not yet quite succeeded. The other hallmark of an old growth forest is this beautifully undulating landscape. And we see very little of that nowadays. Everything has been cultivated or built on, bulldozed, whatever. So you don't see this kind of gently rolling form that was very typical of old growth trees. There are 10 of them in the Atlanta area. They're very small areas, but they're quite wonderful. Some are on private property and you can't visit them. One is in Fernbank Forest, but it is possible to look these up online and find out where they are and visit them. Okay, so next, and we're going to skip one and go to the next. Yes, this is Struggle. I have a white oak tree in my front yard that was there before the building, our house was. And it was one of the very few surviving trees from the property, which of course had been bulldozed and built on. This tree but it was a mature tree when we moved in 35 years ago. And the tree, the white oak had contracted something called jumping leaf gall. And it was rather beautiful in the beginning because the leaves looked as if they were embedded with tiny amber jewels. And then they would unfortunately die, the leaves would, and the limb, it's common in white oak, often it's just one limb or so. This was the entire tree that was really engulfed with these things. And in 1 year, the tree lost 3 full sets of leaves and replenished them each time in one growing season. So I thought, whatever it takes to keep this tree alive, I'm going to do. So I did get its roots fertilized, but mostly for me at least, I began a series of writings and poems and journals and drawings in my effort to work with the tree. So here's the white oak leaf. You can see those little round beads of the eggs of a certain type of wasp, and then the dead broken leaf below. They turn very, very black and fall long before it's time for the leaves to start falling. Okay. And this was my hope. All of these works you're seeing right now were very small works. My husband had surreptitiously, when we were in Italy, bought a beautiful stack of watercolor papers for me, small size, a little different proportion than the typical 8.5 by 10, but that general kind of size. So you can see in this one, the shape of the white oak leaf and which is for me at this point emblematic. It's a talisman for me, for the tree. The tree is a representative to me of all trees. And finally, for our endangered environment. So in this one, the little amber beads are just floating across, and the tree is radiating out its effort to survive. Okay. And this was the first larger work that I did in the series. And I've been working on this series for a while, so this is around 2014, I think. And this is 3 leaves. You can see the dimensions of the piece. It's 41 by 29. Most of the works that I'll show you will be on arch or arches, as you prefer, paper. And this is a very heavy weight paper that I really enjoy working with. And also it's typical of the kind of layering that I've really worked very hard on in this series, but have used a little bit in the past, so that there's writing underlying the outer periphery there, and that's been painted over and then chine collé on top of that. There are 3 of the white oak leaves, and then they're the sort of, when the leaves would die, often their main vein would seem to break and they would be in a sort of rough chevron shape. So that's what those forms represent. And then the sort of spirit of those leaves are the whiter chevrons. And I think we can go on from that one. Next. Next.
I'm trying.
Oh, okay. Uh-oh.
Not sure why. It just doesn't want to go. There we go.
Okay, and this slide is really a bit too dark. It is a lichen I had, oh wait, we've
There we
jumped.
go. There we go. Okay.
One up, go up one more above. This is it.
There we go. It's stuck. I apologize.
That's okay. Better than I did last week.
Hey, we're a team. We're a team. It's okay.
This is movement, and it's about these changes that trees are going through and how we have to deal with that and how they can attempt to deal with it. So it's also 41 by 29. It's one of the relatively large pieces. All of this entire series, with a notable exception that we'll come to, are on paper. And so you see the radiating circle coming in from the left. It's centered in the middle and the white oak leaf. And then over to the right, lower right, you see the circle as it's leaving that area. Okay. And this one is White Oak Night. And for me, it has a very different feeling from the other pieces because of the black and because it has what I consider a sort of percussive or staccato rhythm that I wanted to reflect the concern, the fear really that I had for this tree. And so it really was a period of darkness for the tree and for me as far as the health of the tree went. This was supposed to be one of those tall pieces like we've just seen 2 of, but I couldn't make the middle section work. So finally I cut the middle section out. I turned the top piece on its end and the bottom piece on its end, and so they become a more or less square shape, and solve that problem. But I wanted to keep this piece in because even though I'd had that particular struggle with it, the darkness and the kind of a little more turbulent feeling I really wanted to come across in this piece. Next. Okay, that's the one that's such a dark slide. It shouldn't kind of be on this, but I had found a lichen about the size of my thumbnail. And at first it looked like it was plastic when I looked at it on the ground. And I thought, oh, it's part of a collar for a Barbie doll or something. So anyway, I picked it up and it was, no, it's a tiny lichen. And I wanted to work with it partly because in my experience, lichens and other mushrooms sometimes too can sort of be signaling the death of a tree. So I haven't seen any more, fortunately, and I didn't put it back on the ground, but I did paint it on the top. It was just this beautiful, which is the left-hand side of that central circle, white on white, and then on the bottom side, a lot more brown in it and a little different kind of configuration. So that's what that one was. Okay, next. And this was another white oak piece. And again, the chevrons, the sort of spirit of the tree rising and the chevrons going down, the death the death of those leaves. There is a central leaf, which is green. Doesn't show real well here now, but it is a soft green. And so that represents for me the vibrant, healthy leaf. I showed these slides to the Emeritus College, and someone immediately pointed out that I have a cross shape in the center of the upper center, and it is not intended as a cross. It is just what happens when you've got verticals and horizontals and they intersect each other in that way. So it's not a religious symbol in that sense at all, in case that occurred to you. Okay, next. This is chaos, and this was a piece I long struggled over also. You can see there's the central circle, there's another circle sort of rotating into it and then coming out with the third circle on the right side. And or right side on my screen, I assume it is. You can see the yellow of the white oak leaf there in the middle. And and it also has writing and layers of that. And I couldn't resolve it. And it was so frustrating, and because I'd worked a long time on it. It was a very complicated piece. And I finally just tacked it to the wall with its face to the wall so that it couldn't taunt me every time I went into the studio. But finally, at 2 a.m. one morning, I said, it needs triangles. And so the next day I came down, and there are little sheen collé triangles scattered over this, and it just did exactly what I wanted. So I was fortunate for that little epiphany in the middle of the night. Sheen collé, and if you're not familiar with it, is literally glued Chinese. Collé is glued, and sheen is Chinese. It's not a very elegant translation or elegant term in translation, but in any event, it refers to any Asian paper. And I just use it with polymer medium, which is what I use for everything, since these have a lot of acrylic paint in them. And it holds it very nicely in place, but it also doesn't discolor or weaken. The bond doesn't weaken. So that's that piece. And it is that same 29 by 41 in this case, since it is a horizontal piece. Okay, next. You're good. Cold Moon. We had been to Alaska, and I had such in 2015, I think, and I'd never seen glaciers before, and I was just stunned at their beauty, even though you knew they're deteriorating, they're melting, they're coming apart. And we were mostly in a hiking, walking trip with Road Scholar. But for this one day, just a day trip, not an overnight trip, we went up the Kenai Fjord in Alaska and saw the Ayalik, I think is the pronunciation, glacier. And we were there in August, and it was sleeting and snowing. It was very cold. But and they pointed out that the glaciers can rebuild themselves a bit during the course of the winter. But in any event, they also had a series of photographs of this glacier, and it was definitely diminishing a great deal over the period of years. So this is Cold Moon, and it's just thinking about that cold. I've also used leaves and dipped them in paint. So you get these sort of imprints of leaves scattered around the surface. It's got the typical white oak leaf in the very middle, and then these circular sort of moons. And it was very cold there. And we just left Atlanta 85 degrees to go there, and it's, well below freezing every night and pretty cold during the day too. Okay, next. Next.
Working on it. There we go.
Okay. Oops, you missed one. I'm sorry, back it up. Okay, this is How Many Moons. And I believe that Native American cultures have often measured time as we do with months in moons. And so this is thinking about the tree and the glaciers and how many moons How long are these things going to be with us? But also, when are we going to realize the problem? We've known about climate change for decades. And all of the problems that are attendant to it, and we need to really be acting on this. So that's what the how many moons refers to. Okay. And when we came back from Alaska, there had been a series of fires in the West, as unfortunately there often are, but we had serious fires in North Georgia. And I know the Hambidge Center, which many of you may be aware of, in the mountains of North Georgia, even had to evacuate it's a creative residency program, their residents, and also remove all the art objects, all the books, all the important papers that go with that organization to a safe place in case worse were to happen. And so that was done. But on Thanksgiving Day, and in Atlanta, in my part of Atlanta, you could smell the smoke from those fires, and you could even see it early in the morning. It would look like fog, and it was just smoke from the fires in North Georgia. So on Thanksgiving Day, by chance, it began to mist, and you could tell the weather was changing. We had had a long drought. And then the rains came, and the fire was put out. There had also been teams of firefighters coming in from other parts of the country to help Georgia. Okay, so that was Rain After Fire. Then in the exhibition next, I did hang Chaos, and I know you've just seen Chaos, but it was between, so it went from the rain beginning and the chaos of the fire to the next one, which is Ghost Trees. Okay, next. And this is Ghost Trees. It's 30 by 23 inches, so it's as was the Rain After Fire. And you can see what almost looks like a skull, but it's actually an acorn in the middle of the piece. And also you can see that there are some white linear, if you were seeing it in person, I think you'd see that those are drawings of trees, sort of lightly outlined trees. So they're ghost trees in that context. Okay. And this was a very unusual piece for me. And somehow I've questioned it always, but I've come to like it. I took what I considered a sort of ordinary photograph of some trees in the snow when we were in the Boston area visiting Jack, my husband's daughter, and her family. And the snow wasn't deep, it was just a couple of inches, but it was very beautiful, and there were just a few flakes drifting down. And I took the photograph, although I knew it was a very ordinary photograph, not a particularly interesting one, but it was going to work for me, which was what I wanted, and not to copy a great photograph, but to have something to work with. So when I blew the photograph up as large as I could with the equipment here in our house, and I took the pieces of it, the two parts, to FedEx Kinko's, and I said, I want this blown up as large as you can make it, and I know that it's going to be a problem. I know that I'm going to see all different kind of colors emerging in it, and the image is going to be distorted, and I'm not going to be unhappy with any of that. And the man laughed and he said, well, thank goodness I don't have to explain that to you, so I will make the copy. So he made a large copy, and I then had some arches or arch paper on a roll for this particular piece, and was able to make a grid on that paper and a grid on the print, and then to begin to draw this out. And because sometimes the way you do something can shift, I thought it was very important, as you work on something over time, that I work in a random manner, kind of jumping around, so that it wouldn't be like, oh, she started here, but then when it fell apart, where she got over there, it would be a mixture of things going on. So the trees, what I did then, there were little branches that had barely shown in the photographs, but they became, they were the branches, and they became these little white linear pieces that made a sort of mosaic of the snow areas. So the first thing was to draw all of that with pencil, then to paint in the snow areas, leaving the little branches white. And then I put in the trees, and the trees were done with writing up and down the trunks of the trees, but then going over that with washes and Conte crayon to get a little bit more tone working with those. And then the next thing was the scattering of these round forms that I wanted to kind of drift or float as the snowflakes had been just barely floating down. And then when I got this done, and it took about 2 months, and that was long days of 2 months, I I wasn't happy with it. And I thought I cannot lose 2 months on this drawing. I have to figure out what to do. And then a few nights later, 2 a.m., here it comes again. And I realized what I need is a labyrinth. And I have worked with labyrinths in the past in a very different way than this, in very different context. But when I went down into the studio, I just drew a labyrinth that comes from the right to the left, down, across, back up, not quite so far, then there, across to the left, down, and over, and then finally out. And that's where the word through comes from. It is through the snowy woods, not just snowy woods, as I had first thought of it. And I think the labyrinth, for me at least, really did resolve that piece. Okay, next.
Working on it. Notice if we pause for a while, it takes something to get to the next slide.
Okay, we jumped. Okay, here we go. This is just a small piece. It also has the elements that I've been working with, the oak leaf, the rows of writing. In this case, the writing is going around the periphery, which is the case in a number of the works. There are branches or roots, which are very similar in form, coming in from either side, just sort of sketched linear pieces that you can see, and then the kind of radiant quality of the tree reaching out with its communication to other trees. And again, that's a chemical communication, not a verbal communication. Okay, next. Here we go. And here's mycelial web. So this is how I envision the kind of chemical communication that trees are able to have. And it's through their root structure. And apparently when they are in a forest, the trees reach out and their roots can mingle, and they become a sort of support system for each other that isn't just a structural support system, but a chemical support system. And they have some means of changing chemistry when they're diseased, of changing chemistry when there are other issues, of even sharing moisture in periods of drought. So there are various ways that this works between the trees. And I believe it's one of the reasons for which trees, when the other trees around it have been removed, very often die within a relatively within a very short period, a few years perhaps. Okay. And then this is the lone tree, and this is sort of my view of my oak tree. And I wonder how many moons with that, how long can it survive? And we do have some other trees planted, and I'm hoping it's making good communication with them now. So it shows it's radiating effort, but it can't quite go all the way out. Under the sheen collé, those central kind of very white squares, which I like because they give a little bit of different dimension than just painting in the white squares would. And the little the little other squares that are on their point are also Shinkolei. And so there's, yeah,
Right.
this night mist, yeah. And this is thinking about what it's like when you look into a forest and you can see trees seeming to recede and others come forward in the mist of a night or the fog. And that's what I had wanted with this one. And again, the writing and Shinkale and the leaf and the radiating out of those trees. Okay. This was really a series of shows. The first one I had was at the Turchin Center in Boone, North Carolina at Appalachian State University. The Turchin Center is devoted to art related to the environment. And my friend Diane Kempler had a solo exhibition in the same Turchin Center. It's a huge space with numerous galleries and also very well received and wonderful exhibition. So this, you can see it's a very unusual setup for the gallery architecturally. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know how, I'm used to boxes, rectangles and squares of galleries to plan. But this just, once it got going for me, just fell into place. It seemed to break the work very naturally into groupings. So I was very pleased with the way that did work out. Okay. And
Changing.
mm-hmm.
It's funny if we stay on a slide for a while, it
Oops, there, wait. Okay, right there. This piece was a real aberration for me and one that I really enjoyed working with. We were driving down just from Nashville area to Atlanta, and there are little towns along the railroad tracks just over the Tennessee border in Tennessee. And there's a little town called Bell Buckle, and it has an antique store. And I like to buy handkerchiefs because I have a naturally runny nose, and I don't like going through so many boxes of Kleenex. So so it's a tiny, tiny, minuscule environmental gesture. So I go there to look for handkerchiefs because if you can get good antique ones, they're much better than what you now can find online. Anyway, these are metal plates. They were roofing tiles. They were from the 1850s, I think, and not ceiling tiles. These are roofing material. They're steel, I would think, or zinc. I don't know exactly, but there was this bundle of them. They were just a stack, and they were tied with twine, and I could only see one on top. And I asked the man what they were, and he explained to me that they were roofing tiles. And I said, how much are they? And he told me, and I said, oh, well, I can't afford to buy two stacks, that's for sure. I'll buy one. And I was just curious to see, I love the parts of this that were already there is the beautiful color green. It's richer here than it looks a little bit in the slide. It is richer in person than it is in the slide. But they also had a sort of raised shrine shape that I think must have had to do with the way water was supposed to run over the surface to direct the water a bit. And those, once it was hung, I knew they were there. I mean, I couldn't help but see them, even though I was working down on the floor with them. But once they were hung with the light breaking down, you really saw the shrine shape. And that was absolutely perfect for what I wanted. Some of them I just left absolutely plain. I didn't do anything. I found them so beautiful. And the upper second from the left, upper row, has a tree upside down there. And the other thing was to attach anything. I was not willing to hammer or, to make a hole in it, to try to drill it. None of that because the paint was just so very fragile. I had wire, and so I was able to wrap around the places on the little tree, and then put both of those ends through one hole that was already there. And then the problem, of course, would be you could pull them right back out. But I had some old buttons, and so I put the two ends through buttonholes, and then I was able to tighten them down and make them very secure back there. But also, if some of the greenery becomes damaged, and I'm sure it is by now, um, they could easily be removed and switched out. So the one on the far right, on my screen at least, with uh, of this on the upper row is a tiny, tiny oak tree. It was about 4 or 5 inches, including its acorn. And the little dark dot you see above the little bitty green foliage is the acorn. So it was kind of fun to see the whole little tree in that way. Some of the work is written on paper and the paper affixed to this. I didn't want to try to write directly onto the surface. I thought it would be better if I could put it on paper and apply the paper to the surface, because I didn't want to start messing up and having to repaint what was already sort of perfect. And I knew I could handle it with gluing the paper down. I did have one extra, there were 25 in my bundle, so I had one of these to do any little test work I wanted to. There's some real, those two, and then down on the bottom row, next to the left is it's a little hard, we're going to see a detail of it, but it's the acorn caps on a branch, and to to the leaf that just curves over there. It's such a the red oak leaves do that, or scarlet oak. They'll just curve when they dry out. And of course, on the far lower edge, there is an actual second from the right on the bottom row is an actual leaf that's just glued down. Okay, and I think we can go. Next is going to be some detail. So you'll get to see that. Oh, well, here I am. They all had a sort of strip on the outer left edge that had holes in it. So it was perfect for installing. And I had read so much about trees, and I really wanted this to feel, instead of a kind of clever compositional thing, I wanted it to feel more like pages of a book. And so once it was installed, all I had to do, I brought some paint with me to the church and center that was sort of a blackish brownish color, so I could touch up the nail heads so that they wouldn't show on the installation. And that worked well for me. And you can see I was just up at this treacherous height. I was so brave, but not really. Anyway, okay, here are two. This is a leaf, a real leaf that had been dipped in gesso and just stuck on there. And here you can see the oak leaf, the red scarlet oak caps, and the curving leaf and the shadow of the leaf. It was just so beautiful. And you can see a little bit of wire about an inch from the bottom of the little branch, and then just below, another bit of wire just below the oak caps, so that holds the whole thing in place. Okay, and I think next, and this is not as sharp as I wish looking, but anyway, this gives you the idea of the beauty of these things. I could have almost left them completely empty. The one on the upper left is just, I mean, it's like a painting. It's just exquisite. And also the one just to the right of the leaf one, I think is very, very beautiful. Okay, next. And I did do a list of tree heroes, and I'll go through some of this when we're done if you want me to. And on something like that where there was that much text, and I wanted it to feel like an old document, since these tiles really show their age. I wanted it consistent with that in some way. So I printed out a sort of older fashion of the information on the computer. and in the scale that I wanted. And then I had a piece of Asian paper and I could trace through, but I could also shift things a little bit to try to make it look a little bit more like and maybe an old letter set press where you put down one letter at a time. So if you look at the word Skidmore, it looks like the E is too close to the R. And little things like that I did kind of throughout that text just to give it a little different kind of look. And whoops. And so I think was there one more or was that it? That may have been it. Uh-oh. Are we lost? Okay, if people want to unmute yourself and ask any questions, I would be glad for you to do so. Someone?
I'd like to make a comment if I could,
Yes.
and ask a question as well. But I know your work, of course, from student days, and I actually have a painting, an early student painting of Catherine's hanging in my house, and it's very different from this work.
It is.
Much looser and more abstract, and the writing is there. So the most consistent thing that I see, and I haven't seen your body of work, I haven't gone through all your, but it just seems like, I did look you up and I did see that everything had gotten a lot more structured and it just had changed so dramatically. And I'm just curious as to when you started to make those changes in your work.
I think, oh boy, about 1973 or 4. And we graduated in 68, so a few years later. And I felt like the work was so quick and I found it unsatisfactory to do something that was over so quickly, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, because your work seems very meditative now. I'm wondering if that's part of your practice as well.
Well, I don't meditate, but I feel like the work is my meditation. So yeah, it has changed. And when Lois sent me a photograph from her living room with my work beautifully framed, and I was so honored. And I mean, I really was. And this was the first time we had been in touch since 1968, I think.
Yeah.
And I looked at the piece and I thought, well, I have either come a long way or I have really dropped. I couldn't decide which it was. And I think what I need is to bring in, maybe I have in the somewhat more recent work. There are more recent works that will be at the show in Mocha. It was to have been last fall. I'm kind of glad it wasn't, because I have done some new work, and that will be in this coming, I think it'll start in early August and run through most of September.
And where is that Mocha? Because they're Mochas.
Atlanta.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah. And so that will, I wish it were New York or wherever, but it is, and it's a very nice, very good museum that's currently about to transition into a new space. I think there were some delays with the coronavirus, but it's very promising. It's going to be a very, very good, even better exhibition space than it has been.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, it's funny. I looked at that work and I really thought, boy, I just lost it now. I mean, that's it. But I guess we all go through those evolutions and changes. And
yeah, my work has changed completely. So yeah, I understand it, but it's also interesting to find out how you got there, what you were thinking, and what took you from that to where you are now. Those kind of things.
I thought my first husband was an artist, and oh no, that was a message from Karina. I think she's got a blown fuse. Oh dear. Yeah, so maybe she'll come back into this, but anyway, that's a shame. I lived my first husband had a very beautiful small house, not as small as Thoreau's because we were artists and we needed studios, but I lived in the woods with him for the years of our marriage. which was just over 7 years. And then, and you knew him, Edward Ross, your professor, my professor also. But anyway, then I lived there another 6 years before leaving for the place now known as the Goat Farm. At the time, it was just an industrial area known as Murray Mill. And I guess that more meditative thing may have come with being there in the woods. I don't know, but
Well, it's certainly reflective in the work now with your
yeah,
interest in nature. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. I think that was also important to developing that interest.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any other question? You have to unmute yourself. Yes, Alan.
Oh, hi. You have a lot of writing on your works that's in the background pretty much, except for on the tiles. Is there any particular content to that or reasoning behind that?
Yeah, there's definite content. And I don't want people to look at the work with the idea of trying to figure out what it says. I want them to see it as a whole image. But it's a combination often of my journaling and then also I really like to read. And so it's a lot of Henry David Thoreau, for example, and other writers' quotations. I can tell you some of the quotations if you're interested that were in hearing the metal piece installation. This is the quotations from that. The first is Henry David Thoreau. I stood by the river today, considering the forms of the elms reflected in the water. Their singular beauty was such that I was forced to turn aside and contemplate them. Then from Robinson Jeffers, it is time for us to kiss the earth again. It is time to let the leaves rain from the skies. Let the rich life run to the roots again. Then Gaston Bachelard, imagination is a tree, which is, I like the simplicity of that. This is Thoreau again. It is remarkable how universal these grand murmurs are. These backgrounds of sound, the surf, the wind in the forest, waterfalls, etc., which are yet to the ear and in their origin are essentially one voice, the earth voice, the breathing of the creature. The earth is our ship, and this is the sound of the wind in her rigging as we sail. Then this is from W.S. Graham. Imagine a forest, a real forest. You are walking in it and its size, round where you go in a deep ballad on the border of a time you have seemed to walk in before. Then this one is from somebody named Katherine Mitchell. It's imagine being a tree trembling beside a stream, casting your shadow on winter stone. And then returning to Thoreau, a forest is, in all mythologies, a sacred place. And
Thank you. Those are lovely.
thank you, thank you. And I also listed some tree heroes, some of whom I confess I don't even right now remember exactly which ones they were, but one that was really of interest to me, and that was a young man named Andy Lipkus. He's a couple of years younger than I am in actuality. So this was back in the very early 70s. Well, most of it even earlier, in the 60s. He grew up in California from what I would assume was a rather well-placed family, and he was a pretty savvy kid. But anyway, he went to camp in the mountains in California, and he was remarking to one of the counselors how beautiful the view was looking out over the trees. And the counselor said, yes, and unfortunately, we're going to lose these trees in the next few years. And he asked why, and he said, well, what you see down there is Los Angeles, which was also Andy's hometown. And he said, the pollution, you're back. The pollution is going to cause the death of these trees. And Andy said, what can be done about it? And he said, well, the only thing really that we can do at this point is to plant more trees. And so he went home, Andy went home. He was a kid. He was, 14, 15. And he rounded up a group of his friends, and with permission, they went back to the camp. They had an old asphalt parking lot that was all broken up and never should have been put in that kind of environment in the first place. And so with permission, they tore that out and they planted in trees to, be upcoming generation of forest in that area. Then he learned, this was when he was just starting college and 17, and he learned that the forestry, whatever it's called, the Forestry Commission, I'll get the title of it here. Yeah, it's, we're going to do away, okay, the California Division of Forestry was going to plow under 12,000 seedlings. So he rounded up his tree buddies again. He formed a citizen forestry group called Tree People. And he went to politicians. He tried to persuade them to let him have the trees to plant in impoverished neighborhoods. And they said, no, we can't do that. We want $500 for them. So Andy went to some politicians. He was savvy. He was from a family that maybe knew how to get some things done. And he went and talked to them. They thought it was a great idea. So they said, why don't you go to the media? They'll like this. And they did. They jumped on the story. And so, so then the head of the Forestry Commission called him and said, you'd better be in your dorm room at 9, there at your dorm at 9 a.m. because you're going to receive a delivery of 12,000 trees. And it was said like a threat, which it actually was. Well, meantime, Andy had gotten contributions averaging 50 cents a contribution of more than $10,000. Now that's probably 30,000 in today's economy. But in any event, he had some money. He got from a dairy, they donated empty milk cartons. Milk cartons were paper back then. And he also had his friends lined up to do the work. And this is really unbelievable too. American Motors offered him Jeeps, the use of Jeeps, and they would take these saplings wherever they needed to go to be planted. And he and his friends would plant them and then continue to look after them, the trees, until they were well established. He's now working in watershed management, and he has been an invited speaker at many places, including the United Nations. He's received numerous awards for his work and written a number of books. So, it's interesting what one kid that just kind of glimpses the problem can do if they have some ingenuity and are willing to make the effort. So it's very encouraging to me. And of course, he's not a kid now. He's almost my age. But anyway, I think he's still alive and at it, though. I think he's still going, very definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. And I caught the tail end of that story. I apologize. I had too many heaters plugged in, and the breaker that my internet box is attached to went out. So I apologize, but I came in on my phone. So I apologize. I think it was probably one more slide, but we won't be seeing that today.
Well, I think in chat, we've got, is there one more? Okay, show it real quick. And then I've got questions in chat, it looks like. I need to go.
Yeah. Well, and we've gone over a little bit in time. And we can stay for just a couple more minutes. Got some questions, but we're over like by about 10 minutes right now. Okay. But we can, if you have a great audience and you've had such a wonderful story. So if there's a couple of questions, we can take those before we wind down.
I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to thank Catherine for such a wonderful presentation. I'm a big fan of her work. I'm a big fan of her thinking, and what could be better? Thank you.
Yes.
Catherine, this is Brenda. Can you hear me?
Oh, hey, Brenda. Glad.
I wanted to say something very quick. As you know, in my own art, at the center of it is the work of Samuel Beckett. And his work draws me in the way that I am drawn into your work. And it has a lot to do, and I don't know why, it's visceral, with that meticulous structure that Lois mentioned about the change to structure. It pulls me deeper and deeper and deeper and into your work. And I think it is the structure that has that effect. Beckett works on me like that. And I am very grateful for it. So what you are doing pulls me in ways that make me very happy.
Thank you. And I want to say that Brenda is an amazing actor. I've seen her in many excellent performances. She's also a Beckett scholar and authority. And when they had in Ireland a big Beckett festival, guess who was invited to come and be a participant and actor there?
Well, I'm just lucky to know people like Beckett and know people like Katherine Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to know you. And
If I can say one comment, first of all, it was really poetic, very, very beautiful, very moving. The beginning, your oak tree, it's a bit of a love affair between you and an evil tree. And you are alarmed by the danger to its life by the wasps. This raises the complexity of our interference with nature and giving a priority to an oak tree with which you fell in love over the wasps that are trying to live off it. This complexity came to my attention last Thanksgiving, where myself and my daughter and her boyfriend read a piece from a paper by William Cronon, where he speaks about the relationship between Native Americans and the National Park of Yosemite. And he brings up this complexity about our relationship as a species with all our power and care and some natural processes. So somehow, I'm not speaking about death for trees caused by Los Angeles, but death for a tree caused by some natural processes.
Wait. I'm going to disagree because
Okay.
The tree was weakened, according to ArborGuard that came out and did the work, which the only thing they did was fertilize the roots. And the roots had been weakened by the construction of our house.
Okay.
And the loss of all the other trees that were in its lot. So it was human caused.
Okay.
Normally, these wasps will only attack one limb and they do their thing and they're fine and then the tree's fine. But this, because it was weakened, was just taken over. So I have to defend my tree.
Very good. Well, thank you for this correction. I just wanted to bring what it evoked for me in terms of complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. That is correct. We do a lot of harm with our efforts to try to control too many things. And wildness is the preservation of the world. Hey, Emily.
Hey, sorry about that. Thank you for spending time with us. It's been a joy, and I will always appreciate your advocacy and reverence for the natural world.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Emily is one of my CCL friends, and she is an extraordinary plein air painter, very different from the work I do. But she also is, for those of you that know Meridian Herald, she's been working with that project as I have. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think Karina had said we ran overtime. I don't want to get her in trouble here.
Well, any more comments or praises we have for the wonderful Katherine Mitchell? We've got a great audience here and a beautiful dialogue.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. And I apologize for dropping off and coming back on again. They're coming with maintenance to fix the fuse. And come back next week if you like. We have the wonderful Floyd Hall, and we're going to be having a dialogue. He actually interviews artists and creative people and has a sort of a podcast that he does. He's a big advocate for, I would say, like the younger generation of artists in the city, as well as the older generation, really. And so we'll be having a dialogue next week, a little more of a conversation. So feel free to come back again. And if those of you that are in the audience are artists or creative thinkers, and you have something that you'd like to share with an audience, please feel free to send a message to me, and we will send you a proposal to fill out. So Katherine, I can't thank you more for being so, there are some people who come and they watch this show, and Katherine is the person who gets my newsletter every week and comments on every newsletter, and was a demand to be here. And I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, Katherine. I loved seeing the work and listening to you share so eloquently about it, whether it was your process or emotion or science or environmental consciousness. And I've always been curious about the writing, and I was curious if that's my one question about your writing, have the layers of writing along with the images. If you could speak just briefly to that before we close ourselves out.
Okay. Well, most of the writing is, and it depends on the time. Some of the early works were mostly my journaling. Then I became very involved with Henry David Thoreau. And so there were lots of quotations from him. And sometimes I would put together imaginary conversations in works between various thinkers and even myself. But so it's sort of evolved over time what these are. But I'm sort of moving into, well, you'll just have to see the work at the MoCA show, the newer work. And it's a little bit looser, but it's still very controlled and layered. So maybe it'll work for both ends of the spectrum, I hope, anyway.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your meticulousness with your presentation. And I'm so happy we were able to, make it work today. So thank you, everyone who's in the audience. If you want to come, take yourselves off mute and just give lots of love to Katherine before we go on with the rest of our day. This is a good time to do so.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I wish I'd been in the beginning, because she's not going to run.
Great. Well, thank you. And I look forward to seeing your show at MoCA, Katherine. And thank you, everyone, for coming here. And please feel free to come back in the future. If you want to receive my newsletter, you can go to karinasephora.com, and there's a little sign up right there on the website under contact. So take care and have a wonderful day. And Katherine, I can't thank you enough for your patience and productivity and genius.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you.